Hi, I'm David Bennett, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can take one chord progression and take it through 5 different levels of increasing complexity, trying out different approaches, different options to adding more detail or even more development to this chord progression. This video is part 2 to another video I did on my channel, David Bennett Piano, but it doesn't matter which order you watch the parts in. So let's start at the absolute basic with this chord progression in its most basic form. What we've got here is the chord progression A minor, G, E minor, and F. It's a chord progression that's been used in many different songs. I tend to think of it as the Zephyr Song chord progression, the chord progression that was used in the verse of Zephyr Song by Red Hot Chili Peppers. So this is effectively our level 1. Each chord is just a simple triad, either major or minor. So we've got A minor, G major, E minor, and F. But let's take it to the next level. So level 2 is adding what I would call some form of decoration to these chords. So the essential chords will stay the same, but we will be either adding a note to them or changing a note in them to add extra depth. With the A minor, I'm actually going to swap it for an A sus2, which is almost the same chord, but the C has been swapped for a B. So our first chord now is A sus2 instead of A minor. For the G chord, I'm going to go with this, which is a normal G chord, just like we had before, but we've added the note A to it. So you could call that either G add 9 or G add 2, because this A note is both the 2nd and 9th degree of the scale. But you don't even need to really know it's called that. You could just think of it as G with the note A in it. So far we have A sus2, and then we have G add 9, and then we're going to have an E minor 7. So before we had E minor, we're now adding this extra note up here, the D, and that makes it E minor 7. And we're going to do a very similar thing with the F. We had F before, now we're going to have F major 7. So just like with the E minor, we were adding the note that's not immediately above it, but 2 notes above it. Same with the F. We've got the F, and we're adding the note that's not 1, but 2 above. So let's play that chord progression. You can hear how much more lush that is. There's so much more detail to this chord progression, but functionally it's still the same. It could still support the same melodies above. It could still be used as the Zephyr Song chord progression if we wanted to, you know? So let me just switch back to the original and you'll hear the difference. So back to the original version. It sounds so much more simple and cookie cutter. It almost sounds too cliche because, you know, so many songs have been written using just the simple triads. The moment you break out beyond that into this, you're like, oh, something interesting is happening. So that was level 2. Also, beyond what we're doing in this video, I've actually before gone into a lot more depth about how to develop a chord progression in my Piano Essentials course, which is available exclusively on HDpiano. In this Piano Essentials course, we're looking at a whole range of skills that any piano player could benefit from, and one of those is how to develop a chord progression into something that has a lot more character and a lot more expression to it. So do check that out using the links down below in the description if you're interested. Right, so let's crack into level 3. And level 3 is going to involve what I call passing chords. So taking it back to level 1, this is our basic chord progression, right? A minor, G, E minor, F. But what if we added chords in between each of those chords? And we could do that to smooth out the movement of the chord progression. So for example, between A minor and G, I could add this chord. So here's our A minor, and then, so what happened there? I had a chord which was effectively the same as A minor, but with the A, drop down to G sharp, like that. It's a chord that's technically called G sharp augmented, but you don't even need to know that. You could just think of it as A minor with a G sharp at the bottom. And we use that to bridge the gap between those two chords. So we've got that one bridging there. We're not going to try and bridge the gap between every single chord because that could be a bit much. But we've got one between chord 1 and chord 2. What about between chord E minor and chord F, chord 3 and 4 in the chord progression? You might think, well, they're already absolutely right next door to each other. How could we have a passing chord? Well, the thing is, a passing chord, although typically will be put somewhere between the current chord and the destination, like we did before, we found a space in between the chords. You don't have to do that. It just needs to be a chord that finds a way of gluing the two together. So what I'm going to do is this, I'm going to do with E minor, and then I'm going to go to this chord. So what was that chord? That is an E flat diminished triad. So what we get is this. So let's put this all together now. We've got our A minor followed by the augmented chord, and then we've got the E minor followed by the diminished chord. So A minor, augmented, G, and then E minor, and then the diminished chord. Cool, so that was level 3. Now let's go to level 4, and we're once again going to take a different approach to how we can develop this chord progression. And this approach is what's called secondary dominance. A secondary dominant is the dominant chord of a different chord in the key. So what's the dominant chord? Well, in any key, the dominant chord is the 5th chord of the key. So we're in A minor here, right? Our A minor scale, 2, 3, 4, 5, has E as the 5th degree. So the 5th chord of A minor is E. That's why we call it, and that's the dominant chord. The 5th degree is the dominant degree. The chord that's on the 5th degree is the dominant chord. So that's a normal dominant chord. That's what you could call the primary dominant of the key. But we're talking about here secondary dominant. So what does that mean? What we want is the 5th chord of a different chord in the key. So, for example, we start on A minor. Then we go to G. What would the 5th chord of G be? What's the chord that is the dominant chord of G? Well, that is D. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th degree is the dominant. So the dominant chord of G is D, D dominant 7. Or just simply D if you want to keep it simple. It doesn't have to have the dominant 7 on it. But what that is now is our secondary dominant, because this is the dominant chord, D, of a different chord in the key, G. And how do we use that? Well, when we want to travel to G, if we go via its dominant chord, D, it will lead us really smoothly up to it. So rather than going A minor to G, we're going to go A minor, D, and then G. And that is going to be how we develop our chord progression. So let's do that right now. A minor, D, G. And we can do that for other chords in the key. So the next chord that comes up in our chord progression is E minor. So what's the dominant of E minor? Well, once again, it's the 5th degree. Happens to be the chord, the note that's at the top, right? Because if your triad is in its normal position, the note at the top will always be the 5th. So B is the dominant chord of E minor. So just like we did with the G, rather than going straight to our E minor chord, we're going to go via its dominant, B. So let's do that now. Starting from the top again, A minor, D7 leads to G, B7 leads to E minor, and then there's just F left, right? We could have the secondary dominant of F as well, but it would start becoming a bit much, I think. We'll be sort of over salting the food. So we're going to have D7 before G, then B7 before E minor, but E minor is just going to go up to F ordinarily. And you can hear now that although the essential chord progression is still there, we are really starting to develop beyond the original sound. So that takes us to level 5, and here we are really building beyond the original chord progression that we started with, to the point that it may not be that recognizable anymore. And we're actually taking the idea of level 4 one step further. So level 4, as we just covered, was all about secondary dominance, having the 5th chord of the next chord in the progression as a way of sort of guiding us there. Well, here in level 5, we're going to have what's called a secondary subdominant. We're going to have not just the 5th chord of the destination chord, but the 5th chord of the 5th chord in a way. You'll see what I mean. It could also be described as 2, 5, 1. So before we go to each chord, we're going to throw in this 2, 5, and then the 1 will be our destination. Let me show you what I mean. So going back to the most basic version of this chord progression, level 1 was A minor, G, E minor, and F. Now this is what I mean by our 2, 5, 1. We're on A minor, and then we're going to go to G. What happened there? Well, we had A minor, that's our first chord, and then we had A minor 7, D7, G. That was the 2, the 5, and the 1 of G. So it's like we're temporarily considering G as the home chord, as the tonic chord of the chord progression, even though A minor is the true tonic chord. So this is our chord progression so far. We've got A minor, and then A minor 7, D7, G. Did you see what happened there? I applied the same treatment to the next chord in the chord progression, E minor. So rather than going straight to E minor, I went to the 2 of E minor, which would be F sharp, and then I went to the 5 of E minor, which would be B, and then finally I arrived on E minor. And I'm adding a few sevenths in there as well, just to add some more depth to everything. We're breaking beyond the realms of just that one key center. Level 1, and also for that matter level 2, and to a lesser extent level 3, all stayed in the key of A minor, more or less. They never really went beyond for their primary key. But now with this 2-5-1 approach to each chord, we're treating each key as its own, each chord in the chord progression, we're treating it as its own little world within itself. So we really go on this massive journey as we go around the chord progression. So to wrap up, we've got A minor, then we're going 2, 5, 1 to G, then we're going 2, 5, 1 to E minor, and then we can finally go 2, 5, 1 to F. And to really wrap this all off, we're then going to have the 5th chord of the key, the normal dominant, E7, to take us back to home of A minor. We've gone pretty far from home here, so we need that 5th chord, E7, to really pull us back home again. So let's put it all together. A minor, A minor 7, D7, G, F sharp minor 7, B7, E minor 7, G minor 7, C7, F major 7, and then E7, and that pulls us back to the beginning again. such a simple chord progression. We started with A minor, G, E minor, and F. And now we are so far from home, but you can still see this chord progression is still at its heart A minor, G, E minor, and F. But now we are just doing a lot more decoration around all of that. So hopefully that's helped you see how not only you can develop your own chord progressions or a chord progression of a song that you're playing into something a bit more developed, but it can also show you how when you hear or you see a developed chord progression, a really advanced sounding chord progression in a song, or maybe someone's improvising or playing a cover version and you think, how did they come up with that chord progression? You can see the process, the sort of route that they might have got to that chord progression. So this video was actually part 2 to a video I did on my own channel, David Bennett Piano, where I effectively applied the same process, the same 5 levels, but to a different chord progression. I actually applied it to what we call the 50s chord progression, the chord progression of 1, 6, 4, 5. So if you'd like to check out that video, then do head down to the description down below this video where it is linked. Thanks very much.